This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 28th of March 2024 at home in Wicklow, and it is an episode that looks at belief and what we choose to believe, about the world and what we choose to believe about ourselves. And my argument is that what we believe, the beliefs we choose to reinforce our world, these have a huge impact on our personal wellness, and therefore have great implications for how we conduct ourselves in life and how we interact with others and with the world. And this episode was inspired by, again, and this is part of my own recent lived experience, just a very recent bout of intense depression, and I'm just sort of reflecting on how my belief system alters and how different it is from a period of mental and emotional unwellness, and comparing that with what I consider to be my more normal state and the way the world changes according to the belief system. And I feel that this is very relevant in a time when identity politics and kind of the culture wars continue to rage across the world and in online spaces, and the impoverishment of discourse, I think, is really connected to an unhealthy subjectivity and emotionality and belief systems that are too loaded in subjectivity, and people's inability to detach, draw back, step out, and try to access some semblance of objectivity. So that's what's coming up. I hope that sounds like it might be your bag. And contrary to how the subject matter might sound, it's not a heavy episode in my opinion, so don't be deterred. I keep the tone safe, in my opinion. You may disagree, but you can reach out and tell me if you like. Okay, so that's what's coming up. I hope you'll stay with me. I will see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. You're very welcome. And let me apologise straight away for those of you who by some miracle might be regular listeners who pick up my pod at its normal time of release, which normally would have been about just over 12 hours ago. I didn't manage to get my recording done until just before the time of release now. So if you went looking and it wasn't there, I'll share the reasons why momentarily, but it's here now, and I hope you haven't been put out. But as I say, that would be close to miraculous. if I had someone going, no, I was waiting, and certainly I haven't been inundated with queries as to its whereabouts. And let's be fair, the delay is less than 24 hours, so not too dramatic. So look, I'll just start there. I guess I'll work in reverse. The larger topic of today's episode is going to be belief and what we choose to believe. Because I do feel that that's very relevant to my most recent lived experience over the last few days. Yeah, I'm hesitating because it feels a bit brutal to jump straight in, but in keeping with my commitment to being as transparent as I feel is appropriate, and tethering that transparency to a version of advocacy for living a more honest life and living more honestly with ourselves, which I think is key to staying well. I think that's key to remaining resilient or improving our resilience. I think it's key to having relatively easy access to positivity and optimism and a belief in better possibilities. And on the back of those nice words, I'll tell you that the last thing I did last night before going to bed was I punched myself in the head twice. Once in the jaw and once in the forehead. And that was in response to just looking at myself in the mirror and feeling very angry with myself and judging myself very harshly for my failure to be well. And it's been a very long time since I've done that. It wasn't, it wasn't a constant feature of my behaviour when I was embattled or depressed, but it's happened frequently enough over the years that it's not shocking to me. Very impulsive, very much prompted by a need to release or vent or act out or take action to demonstrate to myself a level of frustration that I haven't managed to release otherwise. It seems incredibly adolescent, juvenile, immature. But I recognise there's something very, very sad in that behaviour as well. And again, I'm not saying this to generate sympathy or, concern. I'm just trying to be open. I went to bed straight after that and fell asleep very quickly with a slightly throbbing head. And I slept pretty well, and I could feel my mood shift through the night. I can tell if I wake up in the night and I can just sense my energy, how I'm responding to my wife beside me who's asleep. That kind of chemical sensitivity. I could tell something was shifting for the better. And then when I woke up finally this morning, it's a strange sensation. There's a sort of a sheepish, tentative sensing of self before emerging cautiously from the cave. And it's almost like a hibernating animal emerging from its reclusive den and taking those first delicate steps out into spring. And in my case, and maybe if you're someone who's had experience of depression or any intense kind of episode of, the words that come to mind are anxiety or self-loathing, self-abnegation. If you experience it in intense waves, like an assault, and then it's like a switch goes off to deactivate that, and the feeling is one of surreality and recognition that circumstances have changed very dramatically internally, and therefore how we relate to the external world changes quite dramatically as well. So when I woke this morning, my feeling was one of sheepishness. So there's definitely an element of shame, and not especially ashamed of how I behaved towards other people, because I generally don't maltreat other people. I think, of course, of my wife and daughter. I was working at my aunt's house yesterday. I'll present as normal. I had a Zoom meeting with some really good people yesterday in relation to a project I'm working on, and again, I'd present as someone without reason to be concerned about, pleasant, responsive, reactive, interested, communicative. But I was not in good form at all. And so my shame then is not directed at how I behave towards others, but it's a sort of a shame of how I behave towards myself. And a shame at the sort of the cruelty that I direct at myself. And it's, it's like, I don't know, it's like being at a party. It's like being at a party and completely trashing the place and pushing people over and smashing bottles and windows and upturning furniture and having an enormous fit, a big adult tantrum, and then switching personalities and not recognizing what just happened and not recognizing that person, but being aware that it just happened, and then sort of apologetically raising a glass and going, cheers, and hoping people will understand. And this process for me is one of asking myself to understand and go, I don't really recognize that person who was inhabiting this body for the last 48 hours. And that's a bit of a disingenuous thing to say, because my familiarity with this experience over, a lifetime, well, since my adolescence, having episodes like this with varying degrees of intensity and varying periods of time between incidents, I have familiarity. I know how I can get, and I understand. Well, how I understand it is that if there are repeat episodes, if there's a pattern of these occurrences, angry, depressive states, what it's communicating to me is that, okay, so there's a deeper level of instability. There's a deeper level of uncertainty, or a level of discomfort with this moment in time that I'm not at peace with. And so my quest then becomes, well, what is it? What is the underpinning source of upset? What's the underpinning source of destabilization, of internal combustion and rejection of self? And I trust myself on a certain level. I trust myself to successfully arrive at an understanding that is helpful and healthful. An understanding that will be informed by compassion for myself and a proportionate amount of self-care. And as I've spoken about before, and it doesn't give me any pleasure to acknowledge that I dedicated an entire episode to this towards the end of January, because I had a really intense period of over a couple of weeks in January, and I felt compelled to really explore it and talk about it in an episode I did. And here I am, and it's really not that much longer, since that happened. I'm like, oh, okay. But again, I'm going to go, okay, so do I ignore this? Do I pretend it's not happening? Do I try to gloss over it? Or do I just acknowledge it for what it is? And I'm trying to do that. And if you go and look at the episodes since January, you'll probably see a bit of connective tissue in some of the themes. I mean, last week I did an episode that was more or less about vulnerability. Fear was in the mix. I don't know if that was last week's episode or the previous one. So it's what you get here on the pod is me living. it's a live experience. It's a live lived experience. And I referred last week, as I have done previously, and I laugh at myself because it's the sort of the longitudinal study, and I'm the subject. And there's, of course, it's not even implied, it's not implicit, there's an explicit form of narcissism in that I am going, yeah, I'm worthy of study. My life is worthy of examination. Now, that could well be true. It doesn't necessarily mean it's worthy of being the predominant subject matter for a podcast. But that hasn't stopped me after it'll be 3 years in May since I started this thing. And the themes for any regular listener will be incredibly clear and constant. So that's the reason why this episode is a little bit later than usual. I did sit down 2 days ago to record, and I was in such bad form, such heavy headspace, heavy emotional space. I simply couldn't do it. I sat down twice at the microphone and just had to lift myself up and walk away. And it's intense. That's an intense thing. And something that I recognize hasn't happened or doesn't happen very often, but I can think of times when it's happened. I remember years ago, before I drove, and I used to travel 2 or 3 times a week from where I was living in Wicklow. I travel by public transport up to Dublin, get off that bus, get onto a city bus and go to the north side of Dublin to my karate club to train. And it was a big time commitment, often leaving on a bus at 4 in the afternoon and not getting home till midnight to do about 3 hours of training. And that's what made me so good. I jest, of course, but I remember one time being on that bus, and the bus from Wicklow to Dublin, and just having to just get off the bus about a third of the way into the journey and ring my wife and go, come and get me please, because I just can't do this tonight. I can't face other people. I can't carry myself any further tonight. I need to retreat. And it's I think it's healthy. I mean, I recognize that. I think that's healthy to do that. It's real intervention on my own behalf. And I can really acknowledge the win. I can really acknowledge the positive in that. As much as I can acknowledge times when I have pushed through and got on with things. But there are times when I feel it's actually okay. It's acceptable to go, do you know what? No. This is going to cost more than I can afford at this moment in time, energetically, emotionally, psychologically, and it's just not the right move. I don't need to extract this payment from myself at this moment in time. I can walk away, and so that's what I did on 2 days ago when I sat down to record, and there wasn't a time opportunity yesterday to do it, and I wasn't in good form yesterday either, and I just thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just let the podcast go this week. But I don't like doing that. And thankfully this morning when I woke up, that tentative sensing I spoke of, like, that's uncertainty. That's, am I back to normal? Am I myself again? Has my breathing changed? Because my breathing does change. The weight in my breathing is very evident to me when I'm in that state. The quality of air around me changes. My personal atmosphere changes. And I withdraw very deeply. And it's like, it was noticeable to me this morning as I walked down here to the Blue Room in #blessed to sit down and record. Just as I moved through the other room to come here, I was like, all right, yeah, I'm better. I'm back to normal, because my sensory perception was so much lighter. Just how I saw things and how I sensed, smelled, felt things, everything felt lighter and of no consequence. So that's another aspect of how things are different. The gravitational pull downwards and the energetic pull towards a sort of hypnotic state. Catatonic might be a better word, but it's probably a bit too dramatic. But how there's almost like a cellular magnetism or attraction to landing on something and not moving. So a real sense of heaviness and weight and a need for sleep. And I think that's well documented as a symptom of depression. After this kind of overwhelming fatigue. I don't get that an awful lot, but this time I did. And I thought, when I took myself to bed very early 2 nights ago, I thought this will fix it. And I woke up after maybe 9 hours sleep yesterday morning, and it hadn't changed. But I still did. And this is part of my ongoing coping repertoire. My coping arsenal is, I continue to do things that are more likely to produce a healthy result. So at 5 a.m. yesterday morning, I took myself up the mountain to walk the dog, and I came back and I did my qigong, tai chi breathing exercises. And on my way up to my aunt's house yesterday, I went to the sea to swim. It was too rough, and I chose not to swim. But I was actually infuriated. I was so disgusted that the sea couldn't accommodate me. But I'll try again today. So look, I apologize if you feel like that's not what you want to hear, or if it makes you uncomfortable, or you're looking for something light and breezy. I mean, I don't consider this not light and breezy. I think there's a way to talk about it, and I think the majority of the time I do talk about this stuff, I manage to pitch it in the right place where hopefully you can hear a certain amount of objectivity. I try not to be glib or flip about it, but to treat it with the respect that it deserves. And I think the corollary of that is that, I'm treating myself with respect, which I think is an important element of self-care and wellness as well. So there you go. So thanks for bearing with me. And you're asking yourself, hold on, wasn't this episode meant to be about belief? Well, listen to this. So part of my dialogue when I'm in crappy headspace, and even that euphemizes it too much, because it's much worse than crappy headspace. It's very, very dark. In my case, my thoughts are very, very dark and very self-destructive. But the dialogue I enter into usually orients around ideas of uselessness and worthlessness, and I heap very negative vocabulary and thoughts and ideas and convictions on top of those ideas. And there's an anger, a blistering, furious disgust that infuses everything. And it's very unpleasant. And it's kind of fascinating to me that I let it get, I let it get as bad as it does. And I mean, I don't even know if it's fair to use a word like let, or I allow it to, or I give it permission. Because once it's in. And then the objective is, how can I get this out? Or how can I let this pass through? What door needs to open? I mean, earlier in the year when I was speaking about this more euphemistically, I talked about, I had guests in, unwanted guests come in and occupy my space. And then it's a matter of like, when are they going to leave? Can I show them the door? Can I let them just pass through like noisy revelers moving through a corridor inside me, but safely exiting with minimal damage? But it's like they walk in and it's like all doors lock and they're locked in, and it's just, oh man, here we go. But my question is, or my reflection is, what do I choose to believe? Because in the moment of anger, even though I'm saying those things, I'm not sure I truly believe them. It's very emotional. And very persuasive and very powerful and overwhelming. And yet, I don't know if I truly, in that state, even in that state, I don't know if I really believe the narrative I'm pummeling myself with. I recognize that I'm in an altered state, and my lived reality at that moment is, really horrible. And it does sort of spike. It does kind of peak and trough. Peaks with anger, troughs with sort of listlessness and the fatigue. That's the sort of the range of motion within it. And so this idea then of kind of, if underneath everything, the work I've managed to do on myself over a lifetime, the conviction I have about my default personality, which I believe is much kinder towards myself and is much more compassionate and caring of myself. I think that foundation is strong enough, behind the curtain or underneath the floor to survive this. And yet, ultimately, it is a matter of belief. And maybe that is something that I'm negotiating at the moment, like that sense of, well, do I believe there's going to be further positive progress, further evolution, further growth, consolidation of better things, projects and aspirations come to fruition? Do I believe that? Do I believe in other areas of my life that there's the possibility of renewal, the possibility of restoration? Do I believe in myself that there is ongoing resources in the area of resilience, positivity, self-belief, the ability to withstand whatever comes along, whatever life throws at me, the belief to keep faith with this project, this ongoing thing, the podcast, the belief that I can keep it in perspective. And I've spoken about that before, the idea of perspective and proportional responses, and the ability to not catastrophize, because of course in that negative headspace, in a depressive state, particularly when it's at the angry end of the spectrum, the catastrophizing can be quite extreme, and the castigation of self can be quite extreme. And ultimately I come out of it and go, whoa, what the hell? What made me turn on myself so viciously? And I think what I've been experiencing this year is I'm not really finding very obvious, triggers, if you like, or instances or moments of provocation. I'm very, very attuned to my own areas of sensitivity, and I'm pretty good at identifying quickly. Oh yeah, I didn't enjoy hearing that or feeling that. Or I recognize my response to that is quite strong, and in the area of self-doubt or uncertainty or anxiety. But the actual onset of the extreme and altered headspace, or the altered base state, that hasn't been so obvious. Like, what specifically kicked that in? And I'm just trying to breathe into it. That's very much what I'm trying to do, and roll with the punches, so to speak. But to come back then to the idea of belief, I think belief, and this is, I think this is interesting and very relevant at this moment in time, where the battlefield of belief and the battlefield of conviction, the battlefield of opinion, and all of these things become sort of battlefields for value systems and morality, and a form of personal sovereignty. The terms of engagement seem to be massively tethered to belief systems, what people believe and what people believe should be prioritized. And I think it feeds into extreme emotional reactivity and extreme anger and extreme desire for the destruction of one's enemies. And sure, we can go and look at what's happening in Gaza if you want to literalize that. And I mean, that's, there's so much more to that and so much history to it. And, I'm just trying to stay away from that, to be honest with you, because it's just like, man, yeah, I'm not even going to start. It's just such a horror of human failure on so many levels. And, I just wish Israel would just stop what the hell they're doing. And I wish there was enough political will in the world to go, no, this will not be allowed to continue. But it's all, it has been continuing, and continues to be a very bleak and demoralizing situation. But there are beliefs at play there. And, beliefs can be irrational, and beliefs can be dishonest and disingenuous. But if you bring it back to the sort of, if we bring it back to sort of the wellness kind of spectrum, and think about what we choose to believe about ourselves, I think it's, regardless of the veracity, the accuracy, the empirical fortitude of one's beliefs, it's kind of irrelevant in a way, because like what we believe affects us so profoundly and shapes us so profoundly and shapes how we view ourselves and how we view the world around us and how we view other people. But it's so massively subjective. And so the question is then, really, when it comes down to it, it becomes something that's very pragmatic. Are your beliefs serving you well? I mean, that's it. Are your beliefs helping you, or are they harming you? Are your beliefs worth interrogating? And are your beliefs part of a structure that is obscuring something more truthful and honest about your life? Are your beliefs helping you delude yourself? Are they opening a door, or are the opposite, like locking a box on a certain area of denial? Are your beliefs adjacent to magical thinking? I have a bit of that in me. But I feel sometimes, and by magical thinking, it's allowing, maybe, I think how some people would describe magical thinking is an illogical or undue faith or optimism that something spectacularly positive will happen in your life, even though you've done very little to create that outcome. So it's more, it hovers more in an area of faith, of having a sense of serendipity or karmic karmic intervention or karmic resolution or karmic reward, and skeptics would be like, yeah, right. But there's something in that area that really does, has always appealed to me. And my belief is, if you are kind of constant in what you're putting out in the world, that there is a recognition, that there is a proportional or proportionate response to that. Every action an equal and opposite reaction. There's something that will eventually harmonize with what you are doing. And whether that's you creating the circumstances slowly over time and gradually eliminating the things that don't harmonize, that don't complement, that don't accommodate, until all that's left are the things that fit with how you are and how you operate and how you view things. That doesn't sound so terrible to me. It doesn't sound so horrendous. It certainly, it certainly fits with certain ideas from martial arts, the repetition, the constant application, the happiness or the acceptance or the contentment with not deviating, the contentment with repetition of the action, the faith that will ultimately serve you, and there's a discipline to that. And there's a calmness to that. And, as I say that now, speaking today in a restored frame of mind, that fits very well. But I could not have sat here this time yesterday and said the same words with any confidence. And so it's a bit like, and I'm inviting in examination and I'm inviting in interrogation here. And acknowledging the flawed logic, because in a way this is just good reviews, bad reviews. So, the truism in the acting profession is don't read reviews. The bad ones will crush you, upset you, demoralize you. And the good ones, well, you won't trust them. You'll go, I can't believe this. If it's positive, it's too good to be true. But why would we then lend veracity to the bad reviews and doubt the good ones? And it's like, well, it all becomes a bit meaningless. Like, you're going to believe one, believe the other. If you're believing both good and bad reviews, then neither are believable. So they kind of cancel each other out. It's very important that I tell myself that, because most reviews I ever had in my career were pretty mediocre, if not outright bad. I'm still waiting for the right vehicle. Although I don't think my wife has any great faith in my return to an acting career. But so what I'm trying to say is, like, I recognize there's a sort of an artificiality to, I believed one thing yesterday, I believe a different thing today. I choose to believe the thing I believe today is more worthwhile. Now, I do believe that, as it happens, because yesterday I was in pain and today I'm not. So I'm like, yesterday wasn't healthy. Now I can go, yeah, but look, I've learned from it, or I can articulate it. I can articulate the experience for the benefit of myself and others, and therefore, isn't it it's a positive thing? Like, that's spin. That's spin. It's, whatever. It's like, again, I talk about it because I believe in the value of sharing an honest human experience. And I believe in the value of trying to find the right words to communicate effectively, because I believe that lands in a more real place. And once again, to come back to the time we live in and the information overload, there's an awful lot of stuff out there that just has no substance. And what do we choose to believe? Do we believe that what we scroll through on our screens is valuable? Is it just entertainment? Is it distraction? Is it aggravation? And of course now it's such a volatile moment for news and receiving news, and who do we believe, and what news source reflects our values, what news sources can we trust. And again, you have to drop a belief system onto that frame and go, well, what am I looking for? And it's funny, I respond best to people who sound like they've really thought things through, but that's not reliable. But it's what I respond to. Like, I respond to people who sound like they've really considered things, who sound thoughtful. It's a very human instinct on my part. It's quite emotional. It's quite intuitive. But surely I could find someone who's very thoughtful and considered expressing ideas that are abhorrent to me. And someone will go, yeah, but look at them, they're so considered and thoughtful. Well, it means I'm more inclined to listen to them. It doesn't mean I necessarily have to believe what they're saying. But it takes, I think that takes practice as well. Like how well you listen to people and how well you can understand what they're saying. And it's a combination of different things that help me go, not really sure about this, or yeah, I like that. But again, it still comes back to, belief. And I think we can just get lost in the words and lost in the arguments and lost in the opinions and lost in the sides, the factions, the silos, the emotionality, the subjectivity. It all becomes, in my opinion, extremely unreliable. And as I've said many times before, I think it's worth asking the question, is this actually helping me? Is it healthy for me? Is it destabilizing me? Is it aggravating me? There is such a thing as peace of mind. But as adults, we have the power to choose what we consume. To a certain degree, we have the power to choose what we consume. Certainly, when we pick up our phone or switch on the TV, if you're still a TV watcher, or if you're, buying newspapers or listening to the radio or podcasts or whatever it might be, we have choices. We have agency. We can decide, you know what, I don't need that. And the last couple of days, yesterday I listened to movie podcasts because they're harmless and I enjoy them, and it's a safe place for me to just think about movies. But I was aware that my brain wasn't in a very receptive place and was very kind of sensitive to input. And I was being very careful about what I allowed to go in. And I think regardless of being in good form, bad form, that's something to be mindful of. Now you might be someone who believes I need all the latest information all the time. And there are definitely people out there who are news junkies, and that's a place where they live. And maybe they have a very, capable inner dynamic or mental dynamic, intellectual dynamic that can accommodate that. I don't. I never have. It's not that I'm uninterested in world affairs or domestic affairs, politics, social issues. I am, but only to a certain extent, because, like I said, sometimes it just all feels like white noise. And what I'm interested in is the reduction to something elemental. The reduction to truths that can't be spun, that can't be upsold or have a facade put on them or be tethered to something dubious or to be commodified or capitalized. I'm really interested in just kind of what's the fundamental thing here, really, truly, honestly, because I find that much more dependable. And I don't know. I don't know if that leads me to disengage. I think my wife would argue that. But I think there's, I don't feel any particular inclination to apologise for that position. I think it's valid. I think it would be different if I was, working in an area that the sort of extrapolation of positions or ideas was much more, relevant or germane to what I was doing. But it's simply not where I live. And funnily enough, we had a referendum here a few weeks ago for a couple of different points in the Irish Constitution, one of which pertained to the role of the woman in the home and the kind of the family unit, and another part of the Constitution that considered the responsibility of care and caregiving in the home. And the referendum was largely rejected by the electorate. And partly that was because I think the issues weren't sort of laid out and they weren't amended with great clarity. And they weren't presented to the public with great clarity, was my perception. A lot of people I spoke to seem to be still quite confused about what the implications were and how substantive the changes would be. But I felt there was a sort of a frustration in the electorate in terms of how they received that information, and it was kind of, my take was that it was sent back to the government to go, you need to do better. You need to do better with this. You need to do better with the language. It needs to be much clearer. And that was one thing. And the other thing was I felt, and again, I'm quite I go with kind of my gut feeling a lot with these things. My feeling was that the country simply wasn't, the country just, my feeling is the country felt like, do you know what? These aren't the priorities at the moment, even though these are important things. People are much more concerned about, can I get a home to live in? Can I afford to rent a house in Ireland at the moment? Can I provide or find access to quality healthcare for my dying parent? Healthcare and housing are, I think, two of the main things that are making people crazy in this country at the moment and are absolutely debilitating people. And the cost of living is just so forbidding. And I think the referendum, in a way, was the government's attempt to distract the citizens of Ireland and to give them a sense of power or a sense of agency in that great kind of democratic way to go, yeah, you have a say, you can affect things for the better. But those issues, I feel, are just so far down the list for many Irish people in terms of what's really affecting their lives and really sort of oppressing them at this point in time. So I just think it was like, are you serious? Is this what you think we need to be focusing on at the moment, when people can't afford to live and can't afford to view the future with any confidence of having a secure place to live, and there's a rental sector that is largely, in meaningful terms, is largely unregulated. And the cost of living and inflation and the property kind of madness means people are being asked to pay extortionate amounts of money for really not great places to live, and the government doesn't seem to be able to do anything to change that pattern. So again, that's what I choose to believe. Is that accurate? I think if it's not completely accurate, I think there is a truth in what I'm saying. And I'm not sure, if a government is responsible for that. Like, is it the government's responsibility to really, truly, substantively address the welfare of its citizens? Is that naive? Or is that not part of a government's role? And Irish governments just fail continually to offer a sustainable vision for the future that would really take care of and address in meaningful ways these ongoing shortcomings in Irish society and the growing inequality. And when people feel, or when people, let's stay with the idea of belief, when people believe that they're not cared for, I think there's profound damage. Like, profound damage is done to how people will then choose to behave, how they think about themselves, how they think about the people close to them, how they think about their communities, how they think about their country. And I think it's really destructive when the people of a country feel unheard, neglected, discarded. I mean, it all fits into a mental health frame. It all fits into the self-care wellness frame. And I can look at my last 48 hours and go, well, I discarded myself. I didn't care for myself. I neglected myself. And it's a damaging experience. And I feel I'm lucky in that I've had so much practice at recovering from these episodes and understanding them, that I can, sit here and do this now and go, okay, that's what happened. That's what it was. And this is where I am now. And, it's time to move on and make hay while the sun shines. And it's not, even though before I pressed record, I was almost going to describe, this year so far, I'm having a sort of a schizophrenic year, but it does a bit of a disservice to that word, schizophrenia. Because I'm not actually having a manic cycle, and that isn't my pattern. But I'm acknowledging there's a destabilization that I'm definitely not enjoying, that is definitely making its presence felt on a regular basis at the moment. And for me, doing something like the podcast is part of the solution. It's part of my coping mechanism, and there's other work to be done, and it is always in that area of self-care, mindfulness, healthy routines, perspective, proportion, and moving the body, and communicating the habits of wellness to myself, even in periods of distress. And if I take that model and you put it back to government, what are the habits of wellness governmentally, civically, culturally, that the government communicates to a nation when the nation is in distress? I'm not sure there's a lot of evidence for those habits at the moment. And maybe the Taoiseach, or Prime Minister, if you like, the head of government, who announced his retirement unexpectedly last week and stepped down, Leo Varadkar, whose politics I don't love, really, and never loved. The one thing I've admired about any discourse around Leo Varadkar in Ireland is that as the gay son of immigrants, his sexuality was just almost never mentioned. I just think that's so healthy. I think it's so healthy, and it's so bizarre that in so many areas we're failing as a country. The government is failing us, but in that area, Leo Varadkar's sexuality as a gay man was neither here nor there. It was, whatever. It just never came up. It never came across my radar. It just never seems to be an issue. And I really like that. I'm like, yeah, that's as it should be. He's there doing a job, and any failings have nothing to do with his sexual orientation, or how he identifies sexually. The failings are there because of who he is as a person and of his crappy politics. But he got out, and maybe he's reading the tea leaves and going, it's time to get out. And I think it's interesting to reflect on masculinity, modern masculinity, which is a hot topic for debate constantly at the moment, it seems. But it's interesting to look at Leo Varadkar stepping down when really there wasn't any pressure on him to go at the height of his career. And similarly, I was thinking about Jurgen Klopp, the German manager of Liverpool, and how he announced his retirement very unexpectedly, in the last couple of months. Sent shockwaves through the football world, and particularly, of course, amongst Liverpool fans. And Klopp was saying similar things to Leo Varadkar. It's like, I just can't sustain this. The cost is too great. I can't keep giving what I have been giving. And I think it's a very interesting model of modern modern masculinity and male leadership. Because I think a previous generation of men wouldn't be talking that way. Like, these guys are explicitly referring to their emotional lives and their emotional energy and the emotional cost, the energetic cost, psychologically, emotionally. Like, there's an admission of vulnerability in that position. There's an admission of frailty. And I find that fascinating. And regardless of how I feel about either of them personally, I happen to like Klopp a lot. I happen to not have huge regard for Leo Varadkar. But I really commend that. And correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like there isn't a lot of evidence of that generally. And obviously, we talk about toxic masculinity, a phrase I don't really validate. Like, that has been discussed, that like toxic masculinity is taken as read, as something that is there. I've spoken about this before. I prefer to reframe that. Damaged masculinity, wounded masculinity, rather than looking at the symptom, to think more about the cause. I'll have more to say on that topic again soon. I just had a fantastic experience last week. I went over to St. Helens, which is between Manchester and Liverpool, as part of a delegation, if you like, of what does he need representatives. This is the ongoing community arts project that I've been involved with now for a couple of years, in the youth work that I've been doing, and also the play I did last year. So I was very, very pleased to be invited to be part of the team to go over and present on the work and various iterations of What Does He Need, along with Fiona Whelan and Danielle McKenna from Rialto Youth Project, and Phelim Cannon, my friend from years ago and co-director of Broken Talkers Theatre Company, and also with Katarina Kurtz, who's a PhD student from Maynooth University. Who's doing a PhD in anthropology and education and looking at the public face, or the public iteration of where kind of arts and education meet. And she's studying and researching the What Does He Need project as part of her work. And we went over as guests of Heart of Glass, community arts organisation in St. Helens, and presented to an invited audience. And it was really brilliant. It was a really excellent day. We met a lot of interesting people. And one of my takeaways, again, a phrase I don't love, one of my conclusions was it was really great to be in a room full of people who were there because they care about men. And I just thought that was a really positive thing to reflect on and go, everyone's here because they care about the well-being of men, of young men, of vulnerable men, of men in their communities, in their schools, in their organisations, in their country. And yeah, I think that needs to be acknowledged, because I have the conviction, I believe many men feel uncared for. Many men feel unloved and unvalued. And part of their response then is to behave like people who are uncared for, and behave like they don't care about the consequences, because no one is indicating to them clearly how valued they are and how loved they are and how cared for they are. I mean, that's very, again, I apologise if that psychology is too simplistic, but I believe it's very relevant. I used to have this discussion / argument with students when I used to go in and work as a substitute teacher in the secondary sector here in Wicklow. And students would be like, why are you trying to make us work? Why don't you sit up at your desk and read your newspaper like some substitute teachers sometimes do? And I used to say, well, what message does that communicate to you? If I say, do what you want, mess, go crazy, I don't care. Like, isn't that communicating that I don't consider you worthy of my effort? That I don't consider you worth my time? That I don't consider you worth working with or having an exchange with? That I don't consider that this could be a valuable experience for both of us? And you'd be surprised how many students actually responded to that message, even if they really resented having to work. But I just felt, yeah, that's the thing. And I just think it's, sitting at my desk ignoring them is a very powerful message, in a very bad way. As much as what it reminds me of? It reminds me of the bold boys in Walt Disney's Pinocchio, when they end up on the island and they're allowed to drink beer and smoke cigarettes. But what they don't realize is that the island is one of black magic and evil, and the more they misbehave, the more they lose their humanity, and eventually they become little donkeys, little jackasses who are being taken away to be beasts of burden, and they're being whipped. It's a really scary, horrific sequence, actually. Very, very dark, really nightmarish and cruel. And Pinocchio, due to his innate innocence, manages to escape. he escapes partially converted into an ass. That redemptive journey, of course, is what is so moving about Pinocchio, and just his journey towards that understanding of self-sacrifice and caring for others is where the redemptive arc lies. So anyway, that was great. So thanks to Kate and Suzanne at Heart of Glass for having us over last Friday. That'll be an ongoing project. I'll have more to say about that as time goes on. Okay, so that's it. I'm not sure if I tethered myself as tightly to the concept of belief as I might have. That's very broad. It could go in so many places, but I come back to that central conviction. My central belief is, ask yourself that question: are your beliefs serving you well? And it's trying to recognize then what wellness is, trying to recognize what health is. And as I sit here now, I rather believe in this version of myself. I'd rather believe that this is my truer self rather than the self that was, beating the crap out of myself for the last 48 hours. I believe this is the version of me that serves me best and serves the people I love best. And so I'll invest in this. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for choosing this episode, this podcast. There's so much out there to choose from. If you've given me any amount of your time, I am truly grateful. And remember, you can, if you like, throw me love on social media. This podcast is on YouTube. You'll find related social media content on Facebook and Instagram. It's all under the Clear Out podcast. I no longer use Twitter, now X. I think that's such a awful platform. I must say, I don't, the social media thing, I'm a very reluctant user, and you can tell by my content, but I'll try to be a bit more proactive. And if you do get something from this podcast, really meaningfully get something from this podcast and feel you'd like to support it financially, you can do so using the Patreon link. That's patreon.com/the clear out. You'll find all these links in, wherever you're listening to the podcast. But that's just a contribution of, the price of a cup of coffee or whatever once a month, and it's a form of endorsement and validation that I really appreciate. But I appreciate any positive stuff. Even constructive criticism is welcome. Any level of engagement with the podcast is welcome. Throwing a review somewhere, rating the podcast, that all helps. So that's it. I'm done. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Take it easy. See ya. Bye.